Good evening, Toastmaster John. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening, Toastmaster Lee. Welcome.
Thank you.
9 o'clock, so we're kicking off. Welcome, everyone, to another Friday edition of our Role Players session. Today, we're covering two roles, Toastmaster of the Day and Table Topics Evaluator, and I'll start with Toastmaster of the Day. Just for my curiosity, even though I don't think with the men and women I see right now in the call, that it's possible that none of us have played this role. If there's anyone that has not played the role of Toastmaster of the Day before, please put in the chat box. As I said, I don't think so, but you can never tell. Please put in the chat box. While possibly someone is typing, I'll proceed with the role of Toastmaster of the Day. I'm going to break this down into 3 parts. Interesting, Toastmaster Hioma has not. Okay, I'll break this down to 3 parts. The first part, before the meeting, second part, during the meeting, third part, after the meeting. Before the meeting, what should the Toastmaster of the Day do? The Toastmaster of the Day leads a team. You are the director of the meeting, the host, the MC, the primary timekeeper to ensure everything stays within the scheduled time. Before the meeting, because you're the one that is going to introduce most of the people that are going to speak during the course of the meeting, that includes those that will be giving speeches, general evaluator, essentially every other person except those evaluating, depending on the club, because the general evaluator is in charge of all evaluators, majorly. You may still introduce speech evaluators because they'll come up to give the objectives of the speeches. Everyone that you are going to introduce, you need to ensure that you have the proper pronunciation of their names. Names are very important to people. If there's any name you're not familiar with, maybe you've not spoken to them, you've not pronounced their names in their presence and gotten that confirmation, please confirm before the meeting. You can be with a call, ask them to send a voice note, but just take that little extra step. You can also confirm from the speakers, anyone else that you may be introducing, if they are ready. This includes the general evaluator. If they are ready for the roles they are playing, for their speeches, because you may be able to assist those people with 1, 2 pieces of information, a bit more time, rehearsal perhaps, or in directing them to their mentors or another Toastmasters who has the tools, the ability to give them the information they need to adequately prepare for their roles. You also need to ensure that the agenda is well prepared. During this role players training session, we actually occasionally handle preparing the agenda. If there's something you want to learn, when we're doing that, please join in. But you can work in tandem with the Vice President Education. Prepare the agenda well. If it's not properly prepared, it's almost impossible for your meeting to be within the scheduled time. And there are a few things you can look out for. But please make sure the agenda is well prepared and that everyone has the best possible opportunity to play their roles without being rushed. And the meeting as a whole will most likely stick within the time that's allotted. Before the meeting as well, as a Toastmaster of the Day, encourage everyone, GE, the people you spoke with, to show up early to the meeting. Early differs from club to club and depending on the type of meeting it may be. If it's hybrid, virtual, maybe 15 minutes, 10 minutes, that could be fine. If it's physical, you can encourage them to show up 30 minutes early. And the reason I encourage 30 minutes more so for physical is to ensure that they avoid traffic. We're in Lagos. You may be somewhere else when you're watching this. But in Lagos, anything can happen at any time. Encourage people to show up as early as feasible. And why should they show up early? Multiple reasons. One, because you actually want role players to be there early, get comfortable with the room, and let other people know that they do not need to be replaced. That's one. Two, it enables them to start engaging with guests and other members, majorly guests. Guests, especially first-time guests, they don't know anything about our meeting. Members need to be the ones to welcome them, and it helps you improve your communication skills, really. And finally, if they are there early and some others are not there on time, it helps you easily just replace those that are late with people that are available at the meeting. And then when it's time to start the meeting, kick off the meeting. Now, what do you do at the meeting? As a Toastmaster of the day, you are going to speak the most. Other than anyone else, you will have the stage the most. Depending on the type of meeting, maybe, I'm not sure I've been to a meeting that this happened, maybe the general evaluator, but in general, Toastmaster of the day, you have the most opportunities to speak. From the start, please prepare your introduction. After the Sergeant at Arms introduces the meeting, hands over to the president hands over to you. Prepare your introduction explaining what you do. And there's quite a bit that you do as a Toastmaster of the day. But generally, we summarize it as being the MC of the program, but you do much more than that. As I said, you're the one that is there to ensure we're within time. You're the one that is majorly in charge of ensuring the program is well handled. You're the host. What does that mean? You tell people about who we are. You can start with an introduction. What do you do? A summary. Let us know, Toastmasters, who are we? You can tell us a bit about the club. You can tell us a bit about what we are permitted to do at the meeting. And then go through briefly the agenda, prepared speeches, table topics, evaluation. Why? Because first-time guests may not know anything about Toastmasters. When my club meets physically, Echo Hotel, people going to other events randomly drop by. What that means is they have no clue what meeting they just joined. Who is going to help them know what meeting that is? The Toastmaster of the day. And what this means is you need to pay attention to what is going on. And when new people are coming in, occasionally you may just need to reintroduce who we are. That will help those first-time guests know who we are and get comfortable with what we are permitted to do at this meeting. That is the introduction that you give. You are also responsible for introducing the general evaluator. And the introductions are things you should get familiar with before the meeting commences. I recommend, if you can, if the agenda is prepared in advance, you know all the role players and you have your introductions, if you can memorize the introductions, I recommend that. If you don't have sufficient time, or for whatever reason you don't really believe in your ability to memorize, at least read the introductions. The reason for reading it and becoming familiar with it is so when you come up on the stage and introduce the speakers, people listening to you actually believe that you believe what you're saying. Introductions are so important. It's to help the audience have a reason to listen to the speakers that you're introducing. Be able to say or read it in such a manner that it captivates the audience. And what this means is, when you look at it in advance, you may need to tweak some of the introductions. Some are really lengthy. Some will provide information that may not be relevant to what role they are going to play. You work with the role players or the speakers to amend the introductions a bit to ensure that what you say as an introduction fulfills the role that it's being said for. This is quite important. After you introduce the general evaluator will introduce their team, hand back the meeting to you, and usually, depending on your club, you may start with prepared speeches or table topics. Now, let's assume prepared speeches. When you're doing prepared speeches, you can call the evaluators to tell us the objectives of the speech. And before you call them, Once again, give their introductions. After that's done, you will introduce the speakers. And once the speaker is done, you move on to all the speakers in sequence before we now vote. Most clubs, they vote for who they feel is the best speaker. You ask the timer for the timer's report. All the speakers keep to time. After which, you now ask that we vote for those that are eligible. And then you proceed to the next segment. If you start with prepared speeches, most likely, if at that meeting we have table topics, we are going to the table topics portion of the meeting. Once again, introduce the table topics master. When table topics portion of the meeting is done, table topics master hands back control to you. At that point, you ask the timer for their reports if we are going to vote, and you have voting for the best table topic speaker. Depending on the meeting you're in, the way the club handles it, table topics evaluation as well as prepared speech evaluation may be done at the very last portion of the meeting, evaluation portion. And if that's the case, you would not introduce the table topics evaluator. At this point, you will call up the general evaluator, who you already introduced previously at the start of the meeting, to anchor the rest of the evaluation portion of the meeting. And then the general evaluator will be the one to call the prepared speech evaluators, table topics evaluators, and their team, which will generally consist of timer, accountant, grammarian. Some clubs will have more people, listening evaluator, maybe joke master. Clubs are different. The general evaluator will then give their reports, hand back control to you, the Toastmaster of the day, and then you end with your final concluding speech before handing control over to the president. At that point, your job in the meeting done. After the meeting, because you were leading the team there, I encourage that the Toastmaster of the day will either call or send voice notes. You can send messages too, but I feel calling or voice notes to appreciate those that gave speeches, general evaluator, anyone that was not part of the general evaluator's team, just appreciates the efforts they made in ensuring the meeting was as excellent as it turned out to be. This will encourage them to want to do more, to come and speak again, to play a role afterwards. Now, note, during the course of the meeting, you need to be paying attention to time. When you notice a particular segment is going too long, you should be thinking about how to save time in other portions. Unfortunately, most times, table topics is the one that gets truncated because you can reduce the number of speakers that are chosen. If the intention was 5, you can say 3 or 2. That is not the whole. If your meeting is well planned, it may not happen. This also means that you may need to step in. Sometimes some speakers do not see the timer's card. The red card is up, 30 seconds, 1 minute. Toastmaster of the day, you're in charge of that meeting, that program. Step in. Actually stop the speech. Tell them that you need to conclude because they've gone way beyond their allotted time. Usually, when evaluations are going on, the general evaluator is responsible for stepping in there. But if the general evaluator does not do that, Toastmaster of the day, please step in to let them know you need to round off. In summary, this is what the Toastmaster of the day does. There's quite a bit, but something I like to state, and I'll keep stating it. You are not the highlights of the meeting. Every other person is. You are just there to ensure that the spotlight is placed on them. Don't put so much pressure on yourself to look so good in front of the audience. Prepare, but prepare so that you can ensure there's a seamless flow and that the audience focuses on who they need to focus on. There's a lot, but over time, as you do it, you get more accustomed to doing it, and it will feel very, very easy. If you have any questions, please go ahead and ask your questions at this point, and I'll do my best to attend to it. And if I can't, I'm sure there's someone in the room that will attend to that. And if you have a comment, by the way, maybe there's something you saw in a meeting, you're not sure if it was proper, and you want to pass on that comment, by all means, go ahead. Toastmaster Victoria, did you unmute?
Yes, please. Good evening.
Good evening. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Please, I want to know, can you guide us on how to modify or to compress a profile that you think that is so much? Because I've experienced something like that. A very, very large, size of profile of a person, and they kept on reading it and reading it, How can one just compress it? I don't know how it's possible.
Oh, Toastmaster Victoria, you keep asking such apt questions. How can you modify it? The last meeting, I happened to play the role of Toastmaster of the day. Someone gave an introduction that was essentially a full page. And I reached out to him and said, can I just say your name, your job, and what you do for fun? And he said that's okay, because he told me the different qualifications he had, the bodies he belonged to. That's a table topics right there, a table topics or two. It would take so much time. Think of what the salient points are, which I feel: name, job, if they put that there, what they do for fun, perhaps what role they've played at Toastmasters. And as I mentioned earlier, if there's anything that will add to their credibility in terms of the role they're playing, if they're evaluating a speech, for instance, and they happen to be evaluation speech contest champion at the division level, I think that's good to put in there. Just think, what will be relevant to what role they're playing? And if they're giving speeches, you don't need to say everything. Ask them, is there anything you really want me to say? Otherwise, condense it, name, work. If they want to put when they join Toastmasters, fine. What they do for fun. Keep it very simple, very simple. But please, with their permission, if feasible, meaning if you get it early enough. Sometimes you don't. But if you do get it early enough, reach out to them, ask, is it okay that I do this? And if they say yes, fantastic. Does that help?
It does. Thank you so much.
You're very much welcome. Toastmaster Ihoma, your hand is raised. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, TM John. You mentioned that we could actually intercept, or should I say interrupt, a speaker who has spoken for far too long. In practice, how do we do that without sounding rude?
Thank you so much, Toastmaster Ihoma. I'll give you an example. You've spoken for 8 minutes, 30 seconds, even though at this point is well beyond. I will just unmute and say, Toastmaster Ihoma, please do you mind rounding up? You've rounded off. You've already spoken for over 2 minutes beyond the 7 minutes you're supposed to speak for. That is an example. The truth is, you may still find that to be rude. I think it's not, but I tried my best to be as respectful as possible. In essence, what I'm saying is, think of how you can come across as being respectful, but it may not be accepted the right way. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes sense. In person, if it is virtually, it's even easier. In person, do you walk up to him and say that you're speaking for too long, or how do we do that?
I love that. In person. In person, you can actually stand, maybe go to the side, depending on how your hall is, and mention that they'll need to round up, unless they can just see your hand and you let them know, something like that. Does that make sense? Time up. But if they don't respond to that, you would need to speak. You need to stop. People can't come up there and speak for 30 minutes, 1 hour. Does that help?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Fantastic. That was a great question. Now let's proceed. If you have any other question for Toastmaster of the day, please feel free to ask later. or put in the chat box if you think you'll forget. Now we're going to Table Topics Evaluator. Table Topics Evaluator, what do? You evaluate the table topics. I'll assume all of us here know what table topics is when anyone can speak off the cuff on a topic that you're not aware of in advance, between 1 to 2 minutes. As the Table Topics Evaluator, you want to give feedback to each speaker. Let me say that again. You want to give feedback to each individual speaker. I've been to meetings where the Table Topics Evaluator comes and summarizes his or her evaluation for all the speakers, meaning speakers spoke well, they kept to time, they were smiling, most of them did this, most of them did that. Personally, I don't think that's very effective. And why do I say so? Sometimes we give more, we feel people are more aware of how they speak than they actually are. But the truth is, especially for those that are really nervous, they are not aware of what they do when they speak. And if you come and give a general evaluation, then it's not really useful. As a consequence, I recommend that you evaluate every single speaker. And how do we give evaluations? Toastmasters format, we do the CRC. You commend first, give recommendations, and then you end with commendations. Because evaluation generally 2 to 3 minutes, and that's if the agenda is well prepared. Most table topics evaluations I've seen, they don't give sufficient time for 2 to 3 minutes. This means you may need to check and know if you have 2 to 3 minutes or 1 to 2 minutes for your evaluation. As a table topics evaluator, if you get the opportunity to look at the agenda in advance, quickly check your timing. And if the time is not sufficient based on the time allotted to table topics, speak to the Vice President Education or Toastmaster of the day. And what do I mean by this? If table topics is 15 minutes, you're not going to use the entire time for table topics. You need some time for the table topics master to speak, transition, go back and forth. Maximum, maybe you can have 5 speakers in a 15-minute slot for table topics. What that actually means is if you're doing 2 to 3 minutes, you should have about 15 minutes as well for table topics evaluation. It generally doesn't happen. See how much time they've allotted, speak to the VPE, Toastmaster of the day, and let that time guide your discussion with the table topics master. I only have this much time to evaluate. Please, let's have this number of speakers. You can see that there's quite a bit that goes into planning for the meeting. Now, evaluating the speakers. When you come up to speak, you are giving a speech. Every role you're playing, you are giving a speech. Don't just walk up to the lectern to read a report. What this means is you can have an introduction. Your introduction could be a quote. It could be reference to one of the speeches from the table topics portion of the meeting. It can be anything you want, but start with an introduction. From an introduction, if you have sufficient time, give feedback on the table topics master. The speeches they gave, were they aligned with the theme? Were they concise? Did they enable people to easily respond? Or were they too specific? Give feedback for the table topics master if you have sufficient time. Otherwise, dive into evaluating the speeches. Once again, this is after your introduction. You go in. What did you like about the speeches? And generally speaking, some things that you look at, did they share stories, ideally personal stories? Did they start with a smile? If it was a speech that can start with a smile, were they passionate about their speech? Did they actually believe what they were saying? Did they walk up to the lectern with confidence? Was there a handshake? Was there humor? There's a list of things you can look at that will make a speech be a great speech. Have them listed out if you're not familiar with them. This will enable you easily draw from them. As the person is speaking, say, okay, yes, they had this, they had this, they had this. Then give the recommendations and end with some commendations. Generally speaking, if you have about 2 to 3 minutes, I will say in the range of 2 commendations, 2 recommendations, end with 2 commendations. Depending on how much time you have, you can vary that. And of course, the quality of the speech. However, if it's a new speaker, meaning a guest, and they are clearly scared of speaking, I would reduce the number of recommendations that you're giving them from the stage. It's easier to take compliments in front of others. But a lot of recommendations you can give behind the scene if they are scared. If they are seasoned speakers, by all means, if time permits, you can give them 10,000 recommendations. Go ahead. Because you know they know how to take the feedback, apply it, and come back and speak. Because the essence of evaluation is to help the speaker improve. And to help them improve, you need to deliver it in such a manner that they take it, implement it, and they come back to speak. You are not there to crush their spirit when it comes to speaking. You need to be aware of this when you're giving your evaluation. It's very important. Be knowledgeable about the type of person they are. And if you're not sure, this means that you really need to pay attention to everything they're doing, the way they walk, the way they spoke, were they shaking when they were speaking, what they did when they went to sit down. You may even have an opportunity to briefly go and speak to them if you didn't get their name, just to assess where they are. You can ask, how do you feel? You're permitted to do these things. By the time you evaluate each speaker, then you end with a conclusion, should time permit. Remember, you're giving a speech, not delivering a report. Introduction, evaluate Table Topics Master if there's time. Evaluate every single speaker, end with a conclusion, and hand back control to the general evaluator if this portion is done at the evaluation portion of the meeting. If it's done right after table topics and you were introduced by the Toastmaster of the day, then you hand control back to the Toastmaster of the day. At that point, your job is done. Unless you had speakers at that meeting that you felt could not take the recommendations. As a consequence, you gave maybe 1 or 2, but there were others that you felt this would be really useful. After the meeting, just approach those speakers and inform them in a very polite, respectful way about certain things you observed that will be useful to them. I think that will be a lot more appreciated than just reeling out all the areas that they were weak on and they need to improve on from the stage in front of the audience. Once all that's done, your job is done as the Table Topics Evaluator. And hopefully, you'll be an effective Table Topics Evaluator when you play that role and get more people to come and speak, especially during the Table Topics portion of the meeting. That's a quick summary of what the Table Topics Evaluator does. Any questions? Any questions? Any comments? Let me see. I think I see some things. Okay, yes. Toastmaster Liz mentioned that you can also write a note and give to the person. Please note, in line with standing up and giving the notes, if they don't respond to the notes, you have to act in person. It's very, very important, Toastmaster Hilma. Any questions, any comments for Table Topics Evaluator or Toastmaster of the Day? I don't see any hands up. I don't see any comments in the chat box. My assumption is none for the moment. As a result, we are done. Dear Toastmasters, we are done for today. That is a brief summary of playing the role of Toastmaster of the Day as well as the role of Table Topics Evaluator. I recommend, if you've never played either, and you have, at least to an extent, a reasonable amount of experience, both with evaluating and the meeting as a whole, take up those roles. Take up those roles. You want to challenge yourself, please go ahead and do it. Table Topics Evaluator, you have to be quick to listen and capture details regarding speaking. Your brain will be taught to think very fast and observe, and you learn how to capture things quickly. Toastmaster of the day, many of us already have some strengths. Yours could be planning. Some other person could be in speaking, more as an MC. But since there are many facets to the Toastmaster of the day role, you can now challenge yourself by trying to improve on those areas you're not very comfortable in. Some of us are not very comfortable paying attention to time. That may be exactly where you need to challenge yourself. I highly recommend playing these roles. Get support from other Toastmasters. We are here to support one another. We are here to ensure we improve, we grow. They are not as scary as you think they are. And the best way to learn is to implement. Your learning is absolutely shallow if you don't take action on what you're learning. Attending this meeting, this training, it is virtually useless if you're not going to take action sooner rather than later, because most of what you're learning now will be forgotten. By tomorrow, maybe 70% of the things will be forgotten. If you take action on it sooner rather than later, you'll be impressed with how much you retain, and not just retain, how much you build upon. I highly encourage you to please play this role. Toastmaster Hioma, if I'm not mistaken, you've been around for a while. I hope to hear that Toastmaster of the day is a role you've played. Some of us came in later after we started, which is why I'm not sure how many people have played the role of Toastmaster of the day. And that's why I'm challenging Toastmaster Hioma. She answered earlier. I expect to hear within maybe the next 2 months that you've taken up the role of Toastmaster of the day. The rest of us also take those roles. That's it. If you don't have any questions for these roles, and you have a question for some other role, you can wait behind and I can attend to them. For the rest of us, please go and rest. It's Friday night. I'm sure we've had a full week and we're about to commence the weekend. Thank you for coming. We'll be here next week, Friday, 9 p.m. The roles that we're going to attend to will be posted. If you're interested, please join us again. Have a good night. If you want to talk about something else, please, by all means, you can stay behind. You can raise your hand so I know, or just put in the chat box. To the rest of us, have a very restful evening.
Thank you, TM John.